Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Autism Fridays with Christopher Cleveland. Welcome back to Autism Fridays with Christopher Cleveland. I'm your host, Christopher Cleveland. This week's theme will be the importance of backup plans for a routine-minded autistic child and celebrating every success made in either learning a new skill or trying to learn a new skill. However, a recap of local news before we get into that. As of April 10th, 2020, Governor Herbert has begun to require non-resident travelers to fill out a form of declaration of their health information upon entering the state. The idea is that the traveler in question will be pinged a text message with the form in question. They'll be required to fill it out and not proceed any further until they have. As one can expect in this unusual time, this form will ask people traveling into the state where they have been in the last 2 weeks, if they have been tested for COVID-19 in the past and tested positively, their travel plan, their current address, and that's just some of the questions that this form contains. In filling out this form, the traveler will then be brought up to date on current COVID-19 restrictions enacted by the governor, in addition to gathering data on any and all travelers who might be infected for the Utah Department of Health. Aside from this, the governor has thus far has only extended current restrictions by 3 days. This means that instead of schools returning to normal on May 1st, May 4th will now be the day at which one can begin to hope for a start in things returning to their original state, with restaurants returning to indoor capacity in increments. In a sliver of truly good news, I am pleased to report that Grand County still has only one confirmed case, and of the 2 Carbon County cases, one has successfully recovered with the hope of more to come out of the 2 in Emery County. While testing remains an issue, it is fair to say that we shouldn't expect too much growth now that New York has begun to show signs of stabilizing its numbers, and evidence of the curve being flattened is already apparent here in Utah, as projections had been bleaker in the past. With this said, last episode we discussed the importance of establishing 1 or 2 routines, as well as making a routine that can be executed during quarantine, whether now or later, with the reassurance being that there is a primary one that is typically enacted. I wanted to somewhat review that, as well as celebrating every success made, whether with something in the routine or an activity. This is going to be a somewhat shorter episode, but an important one nonetheless. We'll have more on that after this short break. Thank you. Thank you for tuning back into this episode of Autism Fridays with Christopher Cleveland. I'm your host, Christopher Cleveland. Now, in the last episode, we briefly mentioned the idea of not only establishing a routine related to quarantine and establishing that the one that we had before was the norm, but having 2 more was important. The easiest way of establishing another routine is to plan around your child having their first job. My reasoning? If they start as teenagers, the job can be simply integrated into the school routine, specifically covering what they can do for summer vacation while they wait for the return of school, as well as what they can do on weekends during the school year itself. Should your autistic child be functional enough to keep and hold the job, as I was, you can also stress that this would be a way for them to get the things they want for themselves. Basically, you're trying to use this as an opportunity to wean them off financial dependence on you, as you would any other child, albeit at perhaps a later age. Should you have a more severely impaired child, however, there are options that aren't necessarily, for example, restaurant jobs, but do offer experiences not unlike being in the restaurant setting, depending on where you are. I myself was working on teaching practical and social skills to others on the spectrum of varying severity in my Beacon After School Social Development project that I was able to launch before quarantine. If there aren't options for restaurant or food-related skills, you can also look into whether your school can take them on as a custodian or groundskeeper depending on where you live, where they can work in an environment where the students know them, the staff know them, and they can be corrected if they make minor mistakes. More to the point, a job on the school premises actually allows for an element of familiarity to last even when the child graduates, allowing them to adjust to a different setting. You can even use graduation to say your child has been promoted from student to staff, depending on what your school allows them to do for work on the premises. There is one additional reason for this line of thought. Keeping graduation on the horizon for your child, provided they pass their classes, means that the shift from school to the workforce will not be as dramatic as it would be if it were sprung up on them without anything else in place. The point of establishing this routine being that in most routine-minded autistic people, it's a good idea to start with integration in a familiar routine and slowly transforming it into the normative. For those of you that have had to worry about money on the quarantine, there's also one additional benefit to being a school staff member, and that is that typically speaking, school staff members, like after school people such as myself, custodians, etc., are often compensated when they are forced out of work by crises like this quarantine. And with that, we will get into celebrating achievements after the next break. Thank you. Thank you for tuning back into Autism Fridays with Christopher Cleveland. I'm your host, Christopher Cleveland. Before the break, we recapped on establishing one or two additional routines and how integration of a new element can lead to the birth of a new routine by itself through the simple act of ensuring your routine-minded autistic child attains a job. As such, there's an element of this, especially where jobs are concerned, that's worth noting. The more each little success is celebrated, the more likely this will stick. See, it can and oftentimes is difficult for autistic children, whether routine-minded or adaptable, to understand the merit or point in doing something they might not like. Jobs are no exception. While it's true that you don't want them to grow prideful, pride goeth before the fall, celebrating little wins is a good way of ensuring that not only is there an importance to what they're doing, but also makes the impact they have very clear. This will help them understand that just like it was great for them to go to school, jobs can also be great because they have a chance to help themselves by helping others. Jobs are also a great way for them to learn how to communicate the boundless empathy and compassion almost every autistic person innately possesses, but has trouble expressing. I remember for myself that when I was 14, I started out as a busser at one of our local restaurants on the weekends. I remember very fondly how I felt when I heard my employers thanking me for a job well done, getting on my case when I made major mistakes, and the impact it all had on customers, especially once I quit to go to college. After that, the rest was history because I found myself able to work jobs I hated in the summers between college years because of the difference it could make in people's lives. Heck, even the lifeguard job I worked for 2 seasons had immediately positive benefits to me because of the fact I was able to help customers and, on slow days, entertain kids. The best part about celebrating every little success with this example noted, you can start it now while you and your family are in the quarantine. Specifically, if your routine-minded autistic child is a preteen youngster, you can teach them skills that will be useful in the workforce, encourage them to help you around the house, and positively reinforce every single success you have now. This way you have visible sincerity in relishing their achievements. You have something you can share on your social media, meaning bragging on Instagram or Facebook or whatever is your most major channel, and you help them recognize ways in which they can gain social acceptance from others and not be stuck on the outlier, as often happens with people on the autism spectrum, especially those that for whatever reason might not be able to work a job. With this all said, we'll come to the conclusion of this segment, and we will go to questions from home after this break. Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning back into Autism Fridays with Christopher Cleveland. I'm your host, Christopher Cleveland. For our segment Questions from Home, Jennifer from Moab asks the following. Dear Chris, what can I do to encourage my son who has pretty severe autism to do something other than isolate himself during the quarantine situation? Now, as someone who once loved to isolate himself in more peaceful times, playing video games, reading a book, or writing a Star Wars fanfiction, depending on how old I was at the time, I can definitely tell you first and foremost that you aren't alone in this experience. So, with that said, the first step of encouraging your son to spend less time in isolation is see if there's something that's being done or not done that encourages him to seek isolation. Find out if it's a safety or defense mechanism. See if he's misunderstood something he's been told about the coronavirus, that kind of thing. When you've accomplished this and you understand what's going on, consider teaching him a skill he can practice and learn in the outdoors. Or, if he already has a skill, teach him the merit in refining that skill in the outdoors during this time. A really great example of this can be anything to do with the arts, and especially drawing. If he has somewhat of an interest in drawing, why not ask him to draw a picture of a tree in your backyard, or a picture of the shed where you keep tools if you have one. Something that he can use to practice that skill and work at and try to perfect until this quarantine is over, and something off which he can make money if he decides he wants to use that for profit. The best part about drawing in particular is that depending on where you live, the financial benefits notwithstanding, you might even be able to get him to sit down in the middle of the street and draw a rough sketch of the emptiness of the road. Keep a watch for cars, obviously, and let him know when one's coming, of course, and naturally you don't want him out in the rain if avoidable. But the point is, find something he can do, or has done, then see if you can persuade him to do it outside. And, coincidentally enough, there's actually one thing you can have him do that doesn't even have anything to do with drawing. In Italy, during the worst of the COVID-19 crisis over there, quarantined Italians sang to each other from their windows. So why not encourage him to pick up a similar movement and tell him that he has a chance to make people feel terrific about life and feel good about himself in so doing? I can't tell you how many stories I heard of from these people in Italy who were doing this, who felt inspired, comforted, who knew they were not alone when they heard the neighborhood doing that. And to be fair, it was such a radical movement that even Trevor Noah, as somewhat of a joke in his daily comedy show, tried doing something similar with Aladdin's Whole New World in New York when New York was seriously quarantined at the beginning of the onset of the U.S. crisis. Look it up. You have to see it to believe it. But the point is that music and art, more than ever, have the power to keep people together. And if your son can do one of these things, then he's going to be remembered as a hero for his neighborhood, for a little while at least, and during that time, I assure you he's going to feel pretty great. Terrific question anyway, Jennifer. Thank you for asking. Hope this helped. Thank you for tuning in to the Questions from Home segment, and that concludes this week's episode with the finale taking place next week. You heard right. Next week will mark the last episode of this year's Autism Fridays with Christopher Cleveland, and last episode was halfway there. I hope you have enjoyed this journey with me so far and making a difference for those on the autism spectrum, and that you have enjoyed these episodes as well, imparted to you by someone who has life experience on the autism spectrum disorder, though I promise I'm no comparison to, say, Temple Grandin, Sean Barron, and some of my other favorite authors who are not only autistic but are certified in some way or another to help people that are also autistic. Speaking of which, I highly recommend all their literature, as well as any other authors you can find. In the case of Sean Barron, he's got 2 R's to his last name, and that's if you're looking for extra reading material to enjoy while this quarantine is still in effect. With that said, thank you for tuning in to Autism Fridays with Christopher Cleveland. Stay safe, stay healthy, and if you can, stay at home. Thank you.
Starring, edited, directed, produced, and written by Christopher Cleveland. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
This episode is dedicated to Beacon After School Program. The school district after hours program started in 2005 and my primary place of employment in non-quarantine times. From kindergarten to 8th grade, Beacon After School provides much needed services to students of all ethnic, religious, and other backgrounds with a safe environment in which to do homework, hang out with friends, and complete an array of age-appropriate fun activities. On the elementary school level, activities included our Boys and Girls Swim Clubs, Let Me Run wellness program for boys, Girls on the Run, as well as coding and outdoors activity, including exploration of different animal species. On the middle school level, we offer science, engineering, mathematics, and technological clubs, or STEM, and we continue to offer Let Me Run, as well as recently starting my social development club twice a week, every week, that we are not on crisis. Thank you so much for tuning in. Support Beacon After School in any way, shape, or form possible that you can, and we hope to see you on the other side of this crisis. Have a nice day, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay at home if you can.